Okay, so the last thing we dealt with was the question of the nature of Yerusha of daughters. But what I want to do now is go back to sort of fundamentals and say, okay, well, what exactly is the reason that they don't inherit? And what does that tell us about attempts to circumvent that and in practice make them inherit, right? And again, as I mentioned at the end yesterday, I think this is important because as a general rule, and I held myself back from giving a full share on this, but we can if you would want. But the question of when we utilize loopholes and when we don't is really quite complicated, right? Because if we believe that the Torah isn't just a series of laws, but it's actually accomplishing a certain purpose, so then avoiding which again, maybe you don't, right? Maybe you think the only value of Torah is to keep the law, and therefore it doesn't matter whether you circumvent it through a loophole as long as it legitimately works, so then that's all you need. But assuming you think that the Torah actually has a goal in mind and not just mere obedience, it's important to ask about when it's good to use loopholes and when it's not good to use loopholes. Not when it works, but when is it good? Is it right, religiously advisable, or religiously legitimate? Yes, Rami.
Okay, I was just thinking, we do have that Mishnah Rohan and the
do you want me to say Kaddish now? I don't understand. Yes.
It seems like purposely increasing the amount of mitzvahs.
Number of mitzvahs.
The number of mitzvahs, just so we're able to because we can verify by them. So by
right.
It would seem less of that there isn't so much.
No, you're taking a very particular read on that line, right? Meaning you could easily say that no. Right, you could read that in many different ways, right? One is, yes, Hashem gives many different opportunities to be stop. We could also say, look, even things that theoretically could collapse into a single mitzvah, Hashem makes them into many mitzvah in order to give you schar. But the Torah still has a goal. You can say it depends on certain mitzvah. You can say that's why there are so many, but in general the Torah has a goal. You could go through all types of different ways, right? But like I said, this is a big question, right? Meaning, when is it legitimate religiously, advisable religiously, to use loopholes, and when do we look askance at it, even if technically it works? And again, to give a brief, 2-3 minute summary here, right? Some distinguish between cases in which you're using the letter of the law to circumvent the spirit, and cases in which the spirit is already dead, right? Maybe this is a little bit strong, but for example, you find this in Chaim David Levi's Shuvot on ribbit, right, on interest, where he argues that, look, if you think that ribbit is fundamentally an expression of tzedakah and taking care of the poor, right, that's its ultimate goal, even though it's true even between rich people and whatever, but the context in the Psukim is clearly wrapped up in Psukim about tzedakah, about lending money to an ani. So then, spiritually speaking, the laws of interest should only apply when you're lending to a poor person. But if you were to flip it, and the poor person was lending money to the rich person, which happens very often in the modern economy. When does that happen in the modern economy?
Oh, thanks.
Thank you. Right? It's called buying a bond, where you're lending money to the government or a corporation or a bank, right? You are lending money. The small guy is lending money to the big guy, right? So then he argues that, look, the spirit of the law. One second. The spirit of the law isn't there. The letter of the law still is. He argues the letter of the law is still there, right? Meaning you still can't lend ribbis because, in addition to the spirit of the law, there's the letter of the law, and the letter of the law is you can't lend with interest. But he said in a case like that, it's spiritually legitimate to utilize a heter iska, without getting to exactly what heter iska is, but basically a document that functionally allows you to lend money and collect more than you lent without it being halachically defined as interest, but rather defined as an investment. Okay? So he says, look, in a case of buying like a government bond, the spirit of the law isn't there because you're lending to the big guy. The little guy is lending to the big guy, not vice versa. What's left is the letter of the law, the Isser of Ribbit. And therefore, there it's spiritually legitimate to use a legal loophole as long as it works. Right? But if your neighbor comes to you and says, it's COVID and he lost his job and he needs money to put food on the table, right? Can you write a heter iska there? Yes. Is that the right thing to do? Right? He argues no. Right? Like the guy is starving and he wants to borrow, $100 to put basic food on his table. Right? The right thing to do is to lend it without interest. So that's one distinction. Yes, Ezra.
What if, if it's is it like for like an individual loan? Like if I have my money in a savings.
So this is, I always get myself in trouble when I do examples, because now you want to hear about the examples. I'm not saying the examples aren't fascinating, but
like a Jew owns 1% of the stock.
Yeah, I don't want to get into the technicalities. I can send you shiurim on it. I taught ribbis for a year in Toronto. I can give it to you. It's fine. I mean, you're right. These get complicated. Corporations, which corporations are co-owned by Jews, and not just the formal one. But that's not my point. My point is loopholes, right? Not a question of when do I need a loophole. You're saying, okay, when do I need a loophole and when is it? That's a very interesting question if we were doing ribbis. But right now I'm interested in the loophole question, right? Which is when is it spiritually legitimate? Rushechter distinguishes between passive and active mitzvah, right? Where avoiding a passive mitzvah is different than avoiding an active mitzvah. Meaning what? So Rushechter thinks that it's legitimate to sell chametz. Why? Because if you don't believe that there's an active mitzvah to destroy chametz, you just think that you have to ensure you don't have chametz, and it's a passive mitzvah. So in the end of the day, what does it matter how you ensure that you don't have chametz on Pesach, right? Destroy it, sell it to a guy, right? Why Mechir Chametz says in that case is spiritually legitimate because the Torah doesn't tell you have to get rid of Chametz. It tells you can't have Chametz. If you have Chametz, it's problematic. Now, you can argue that that's not the proper interpretation of the mitzvah of Chametz. But let's assume that, right? Let's assume, and again, that's a machloket, but let's assume that the mitzvah of Chametz is just to avoid owning Chametz on Pesach. So then, it is spiritually legitimate to avoid having Chametz in whatever way. Right, as long as the loophole works. The question whether the loophole works is a different question, right? As opposed to a active mitzvah, where no, the Torah said do this. Right there, it's harder. I mentioned yesterday, Ilana Stein-Hain wrote her dissertation on loopholes, and she argues that it's a bit messier in Chazal. But sometimes the answer is, look, how much pressure are you under? I mean, loopholes work, and if you need to use the loophole because otherwise you're going to go bankrupt. So it's not an ideal situation, but it's legitimate to use loopholes as long as they work in non-ideal situations, right? In ideal situations, obviously they're ideal, so you shouldn't look to use a loophole. But if you have to, you have to, right? Meaning that's another way of looking at it, which is don't chase them, but if you're stuck, you use them. Yes, yes, sir.
Would you say that without the Darabbanan having to do with the defense? Would you count that as a loophole?
No, the Gemara says midaraisa bitol ba'al masagi.
Yeah, but
again, this depends on whether you think tashbitu is active or passive, which is a machloket.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Again, this is the problem. Every time I give an example, what about that example? Yes, it's a fascinating sugya. I agree with you. Tashbitu, is it active? Is it passive? Fascinating sugya. The ribbis sugyas are fascinating. Given.
Is it an okay loophole versus a not okay loophole? But would you characterize it as a loophole? I
don't think so, right? Unless, depending on how much you think it fulfills tashbitu. And again, there are different variations you could go on. It could also, I've heard some people say that loopholes are more legitimate, right? Some people say loopholes are more legitimate in Derabanan than Doraita because, to get out of the rabbi's law, big deal. To get out of the God's law, great, right? That not so great. And I've heard people say the opposite, which is no. Rabbis are only human beings, and therefore, they didn't necessarily predict all the loopholes. So by using a loophole, you're going against what they wanted. But God knows all, and therefore, if God has left the loophole in the system, He must not care if you use the loophole, right? People can say whatever they want. You can really get to whatever you want here. But
you just say that God, if you use that logic, you say God could have anticipated all the rebuttal that would be necessary.
Yeah, I know, it's not a great argument. Whatever. But I've heard people say it. So it's an interesting question in general. But for our purposes, what I'm interested in is, okay, so the Torah says that sons inherit, and when there are sons, the daughters don't inherit. That's not in question. Right? That's the pasuk. Fine. That's how we understand it halachically. Fine, and it seems to be the simplest part of the pasuk. But the question then becomes, okay, let's say we have an intuition that we want our daughters to, let's not say inherit, we want them to functionally inherit. Right? We want them to get some of our property. Yeah, functionally. Right? Functionally inherit. So in order to do that, I use whatever loopholes we use, which we'll talk about B'Hemshech. Am I doing something wrong? Right? Assuming I can come up with a loophole that works, am I doing something religiously wrong? And in order to figure that out, you got to figure out, does the Torah not want daughters to inherit if they're sons? Or something else? Right? It didn't need them to inherit because X, Y, and Z, but it doesn't have an opposition in principle to it. It's not like anti the ethos. What's funny, Ezra?
This would be really helpful if, like...
You said something's funny, so I don't know what it is.
No, it's not like this.
Okay.
It would be really helpful if like, the Torah were to actually say like that.
Thank you. It would be very helpful if the Torah would say...
No, if it were to just actually say, sons inherit.
Okay.
But like, that just makes me like really upset because like.
What makes you really upset, Rami? Tell me what makes you really upset.
It seems that like the assumption of inheritance is that this is a natural law.
Okay, you're using natural law, but natural law, that's a charged phrase.
I know, but
what does it mean? What does it mean?
As in that this is sort of baked into the human condition, that there are certain things that are universally considered to be morally right, and everyone. What are they doing?
I don't know. Yes, what are they doing?
And so therefore, because it's something so
so it's built into the human condition that boys inherit. Okay, and therefore what?
But I mean.
What? So therefore what?
I mean that's not something that I think we today would necessarily agree with.
Okay.
And because it's not like
and therefore
and seemingly like core principle isn't actually encoded into the Torah, like I mean I don't know.
Okay, so let me articulate your argument. Your argument is, I'll leave out I'm mad, this makes me angry. Your argument seems to be, look, if our diuk was right, that the Torah just sort of took it as a given. That's just the way the world worked. Right? This is not like a local internal rule to halacha. The way the world worked was sons inherited, and the Torah respected that. So if that's the case, so then we shouldn't have any strong opposition to letting girls inherit, or finding a way for that to happen functionally, because the Torah didn't decide that boys should inherit, that sons should inherit. It was just the way things were done, and the Torah respected that. Okay, that's a fair read. I mean, that's a fair argument. But we got to figure out whether that's in fact what Chazal think.
Really? I still don't understand why you can't be that the whole sons inheriting thing is minhag Moshe Sinai.
Minhag Moshe.
What do you mean minhag Moshe Sinai?
You're saying it could just be something that is like was a natural occurrence. Like
it was just what people did. You're saying I don't know what a minhag Moshe Sinai means. I don't know what that means.
No, whatever. Maybe I phrased it wrong. Like one of the minhagim from
I know you keep going back to this, but what evidence is there that this is? Remember, all the evidence we have in Tanakh and the ancient world is that sons inherited. This doesn't seem to be localized to the Torah.
I mean, but they could have the Torah could have reinforced it.
Yeah, but it could be, right? I mean, again, I said it's not impossible to say. There's no evidence of this, right? That Moshe gave the rule, that Hashem gave the rule at Sinai that sons inherit. But didn't clarify the rest of it until later. It's possible, and obviously, if you say something like that, so then presumably you'd go more in the direction against Rami, which is to say, no, it's not just the Torah is responding, reflecting on, swallowing, accepting, whatever the reality, the social norm that boys inherit. In which case, while we're formally bound to it, we're not like spiritually bound to it, and we can find ways of functionally getting around it. But you're saying no. Maybe there was a tradition. There was God endorsed, and then God later said, "But if there isn't sons, here's the rest of the rules." Right? And if that's the case, then yeah, you're right. Then you would have to go more in the direction and say it's problematic to avoid that reality because God wants it that way. Right? Daughters are a backup, but for them to inherit when they're boys is problematic. That's against what the Torah believes. Yes, right? That's exactly the point. So in this case, Rami and Eli are putting one spin on this question, which is, does the fact that the Torah says boys inherit first, is that merely its acceptance of a social reality, in which case one could plausibly argue that us circumventing it, big deal? Or does it reflect a truth of Torah, right? Either because the way Eli wants to put it, that was the original tradition that maybe is not recorded in our Torah, but that's really what the Torah thinks, and daughters are a backup, or any other way you want to get to that point, even without some early tradition, and say, no, Ven Ein Lo is a revelation that Aval in Bein Yesh Lo, if there is a son, he deserves it in some fundamental sense. However you want to formulate it, right? Eli is representing the opposite position, which is that, no, the Torah really wants it to be this way. Yes, Ezra?
Like this whole argument also applies to the whole double before thing.
Maybe yes, maybe no. Right? Meaning the Bechor, meaning the exact same type of question will apply, but the answer might not be the same. Right? Meaning, right, again, you're right you're right methodologically that the exact same question has to be asked by Bechor, which is if nowadays you don't want your kids to fight and you think that if you give the Bechor double then they'll fight, can you avoid that? Same question. But it might not be the same answer. It might be, it might not be. Right? There's a reason that Rav Herzog in his Tshuvot, right, has several chapters in this book on Yerusha and Yerusha Bat, but he also has a Tshuva on Yerusha Bechor. Right? Meaning...
Yeah, but there's no way, if you end up saying that sons and daughters inherit equally, but you keep the whole double before thing, would the oldest is the daughter, the before thing would still be oldest son, right?
Again, as we'll see, the mechanisms we use, none of them are actual inheritance. A daughter doesn't inherit in halacha, right? We use loopholes to create functional equivalence of inheritance. Right, but no, right? Therefore, the rule of Bechor is not going to apply to her because, you could use a mechanism to make it that way, but that would be weird, right? Once you're already doing that, to then give her unfair advantage like that, right? Meaning, if you're not responding to the Torah's mitzvah, principle, whatever you think your Bechor is, that's already weird, right? But yeah, you could do it formally; it's possible. But yeah, meaning, right, Rav Herzog, in his book, right, after getting through the fundamental principles, right, chapter 5 is Mishpat Yerushat Habat, chapter 6 is Yerushat HaBechor, chapter 7 is Habat B'Yerusha Mikoach Dina the Malchut Adina, so the daughter again, and then in the Nispachim, there's a letter to Rav Unterman on Yerushat Bechor, and a letter about the Takanat Rabbanim Morocco about Yerushat Habat. Right? Right? It's not surprising. There's a lot of discussion both of Bat and Bechor. Right? There's also Yerushat Ha'im, and there's a lot of Yerushat here. Okay, fine. So let's get into it. So let's see what seems to emerge from the Gemara. So let's start with the Gemara on Kuf Tedvav Amud Bet. And as I've said several times, in Yesh Nochlin, so much of the conceptual work is done in the Gemaras itself. So the Gemara says, Amar Rav Huna. Right, 3 lines from the top. Amar Rav Huna Marav. Kol ha'omer tirash bat im bat haben. If someone says that a daughter should inherit with a granddaughter from the son, afilu nasi she'b'Yisrael ein shomin lo. Even if he were to be the nasi, we would not listen to him. She'enan ela ma'aseh tzdukin. Because that is what the Tzdukin believe. Titanya, as the Brisa says, Ba'arba'a ve'esrim b'tevet, Tavna l'dinina, Shahai, what happened on the 24th of Tevet? What's Tavna Ladinina? What? We beat him. Yeah. Shayid Stukin Omrim, because the Stukin said, Tirei Shabbat Imbat Haben, that the daughter should inherit with the granddaughter from the son equally. Now, remember, we said what seems to be the machloket? I mentioned this in passing, but what seems to be the machloket? Well, let's read it. But conceptually, what seems to be the machloket?
If the Bad now inherits because her brother died.
Well, no. We'll see what they say. Let's see what they say. So Nitmal and Yochanan Zakkai. Yochanan Zakkai goes to talk to them. Amar Lem showed him. He says, "Idiots. Minayin zelochem. How do you know? V'lo haya adam shechiziro davar." No one responded to him. Chutz mizaken echad, except for one elder. Shahaya mifatpeit kenegdahu. Right, mifatpeit is to blabber, right, to talk too much. The Omer, and what was his argument? Uma bat beno haba mikoch beno torishenu bito haba mikocho lo kol shekain. If the daughter, the granddaughter, comes from the father's power, meaning the son, and she inherits, so then the daughter, who is a direct heir, should definitely inherit. Kara alav. Now, and we suggested that it could be that their argument here is about whether you think you're Yorish Bekever, right? Meaning, does Yerusha pass through the dead person? Right? Because if it passes through the dead person, then this is really inheritance to a son.
Yes.
Right? And therefore, obviously, this goes to the son first. Right? The son's daughter first, because it passed to the son. And the son got it, and his sister didn't. Right? Or do you say that, no, it goes... right, directly, and therefore this is a weaker relationship directly, right, meaning a granddaughter compared to the grandfather is weaker than the daughter. If you think it's direct, then the fact that she's 2 steps removed is going to prove that she's weaker, right? If you don't think that the way Yerusha does is it first passes to the son, which obviously already gives it precedent.
But if you hold that the son is basically just like another embellishment, I guess, of the father, like didn't we say that like yesterday how the son and the father are
Right, so I'm saying, so if you think that it already went to the son, right, because he took the place of his father, right, so then of course his daughter gets it before his sister.
Then it becomes a sister versus his daughter instead of a grandmother versus...
That's basically what it is. Because the son already got it, I mean, you don't even have to go that far, but simply since the son already got it, but if you think that what happens is that it goes directly from the grandfather, so then yeah, the grandson ostensibly is... I mean, the granddaughter is essentially a weaker relative than the daughter self. Again, that depends.
But even if you didn't know where to get it, you could still argue that the son is like somewhat part of the father. Like,
you could, but then you would have the daughter. Okay, but still, then who's closer?
You would say the daughter is closer of the son.
No, because the daughter of the son is closer to the son, right? So at best equal to the sister. The daughter of the grandfather.
No, I wouldn't say they're equal. Didn't we agree that daughters, like children, are closer than...
Yeah, but I'm saying, but you're talking about girls on both sides. So whatever koach a daughter has in her father's...
Oh, right, her father also right.
Right, I mean, because it's a girl on both sides. That's what I'm saying. So, but this was his argument. And Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai responds, and he says, Kara alavet amikra hazeh, Eila b'nei seir achori, yoshvei haaret lotan v'shoval v'tzivon v'ana. In Breshit Lamed Vav, it quotes the children of Seir, Uchtiv Eila b'nei tzivon v'aya v'ana. So what's the problem here?
That Anna was a child.
Very good. That Anna is both amongst the children of Seir and amongst the children of Tzivon, and Tzivon is himself a child of Seir. Right, so this is the problem Chazal are dealing with. So how do they get there? How do they say that Anna is both Tzivon's child and what?
Yeah.
Thank you. Right, which is Elam Malamed Shabbat Tzivon al Imo. Tzivon slept with his mother. V'holid Anna and had Anna, and therefore Tzivon is Anna is the child of Tzivon, but also the children, at least, of the wife of Seir, right? Vidilma Trey Anahavu, maybe it's just a family name, and there are two of them. So Amarabba Amina Milta Dlo Amra Shvur Malka. I'm going to say something that even Shavur Malka never said. Now, who is Shvur Malka?
Shmuel.
Manu Shmuel. Now, who was the original Shvur Malka? Because Shavur Malka didn't start as Shmuel's name. It was borrowed for Shmuel. There was actually a person called Shvur Malka.
Was it Rabbah?
No, it was King Shapur, right? The Persian king. His name was Shvur Malka, Melech Shapur, right? Or Shavur. His name was King Shapur. We know about him. He was a king, right? And Shmuel borrows this title. But no, there was originally actually a guy named, right, King Shapur. So Ikadamri Amara Papa Mina Miltla Amra Shvur Malka Umanu Rabba. Alternatively, it's Rabba. But again, both of these are just borrowed names. Amar Kra Hu Ana the Meikara. When it says Hu Ana, it means the same Ana that we've already been talking about. So now, how does this answer the question?
Okay, so it confirms definitely that Seir, so Seir's granddaughter inherited it, even though he had other surviving daughters.
I mean, what it does is it calls someone.
No, sorry. No, not even. Sorry. No, that his grandson inherits before.
Right, exactly, right? And the fact that he's considered the son, right, exactly. It means he's in.
Terrible, awful, no good proof.
Right, because it's only mentioning son. That's what it was.
Right, exactly, and therefore the fact that you have a grandson here that's called a son means he's inheriting, da-da-da, fine, yalla. Exactly. So, what?
Does it say that on inheritance?
And no, that's the assumption here.
Why are we learning out halacha from?
No, it does. Meaning the assumption is that the context there is Yerusha, which does seem to be fair in Bereshit Lamed Vav. Okay.
Why are we learning out halacha from?
We're not learning halacha. We're learning about the relationship between people, which halacha then hangs on. Remember, we talked about this. The Gemara thinks that Yerusha responds to notions of kurva, and therefore, what we need to figure out is how related people are. And therefore, if you learn from this that a grandchild counts as a child, then you learn that that's true, and that has implications for Yerusha.
So then that means that we can.
We're learning out from the way the Torah describes it. It doesn't matter what happened there. We're learning it out from the way the Torah describes it. Who does it describe as children? Who does it describe as grandchildren?
If we're basing it out of outside society, then
we are not basing it outside of society. We're describing how the Torah. We're looking at how the Torah describes relationship between people, which for Yerusha is a function of how related somebody is. Remember? Akarav Karav Kodem. So all we want to know is who the Torah thinks is more related. That's all we want to know. Not outside society. You're not learning it from them. You're learning it from the way the Torah records that story.
Okay, fine. All right.
Right? That's the point.
Wait, but Anna wasn't even years there.
Okay.
And also, what does that have to do with granddaughter?
Yeah, I mean that's also a problem.
All he wants to show here is that grandchildren are sometimes considered like kids, and therefore a grandchild is not necessarily a farther relative, and therefore, right, that's basically what the argument goes here,
okay.
Right? Which again might come down to whether you think they inherit directly, indirectly, v'chulei. But no one's happy with this because Amrlei Rebbe B'kachata Potrani, right? He says, really, that's your answer? Meaning, I don't need Eli and Rami to tell me that's a bad answer. The Gemara says, really, that's a bad answer, right? Every so often the Gemara does this, which is, right, B'kachata Potrani means that's how you want to get rid of me, right? So what's his answer? Amrlo, yes, because you're an idiot, and I don't like you, right? That's what he says to him. Yes, that's exactly what it is. And Haman he says, Amrlo Shota, idiot. I don't like you. I mean, right? It's like your narishkeit, right? Your babbling is not as valuable as the Torah. So please go away. I don't really need to respond to you. So you want to know the real answer? Would you like me to tell you the real answer? I understand. This sounds really bad, right? Because he could have just said, why don't you give me the real answer the first time? Why are you playing these games? But okay, he didn't. Right? He says, yes, look, I understand this is not a great answer, but I really don't like you very much, and I don't really want to talk about it. So, but you want a better answer? Fine. it's very simple. The granddaughter inherits even when there are brothers because she gets it through her father, which shows that the father, meaning the son, right, has already inherited, right, Yerusha Bakever, right, and therefore, since that son would have had a power against his brothers, meaning this girl's uncles, right, and therefore she has standing, that shows that she's not inheriting directly from her grandfather, she's inheriting from her father, right, which means her father already has a claim to it, right, and that's proof because she can go and have a claim against her uncles, but a daughter can't, because if there are boys, she gets nothing, right? And therefore, it is evident that the inheritance passes through the son, and therefore, since there are sons, the daughter's inheritance is irrelevant. And if that son happens to only have girls, so then yes, then it goes to the daughters, because when it comes to the son, who's now dead, you apply the pasuk of him venein lo. But you can't apply that to the father, because the father had sons, right?
Also, if you imply that, you could say that the son already claimed it, right? That's the next part.
1 second. We haven't gotten to Ksubas ben Indichan yet. We will. We're going to get there. Right? We're going to get there. But yes. And therefore he says, in other words, and that's what, right, that the real reason is because you're looking at this as the vantage point of the grandfather. Because you think the grandchild inherits directly. And in that sense, yes, the grandchild is not as close to the daughter. But that's a wrong way of looking at it. We believe in Yerusha Bakever, which means that it doesn't pass directly to the grandchild, it goes through the son. And since the son, even though dead, inherited, his daughter is now his heir.
What if the son died before the father?
Doesn't matter. That's what I keep saying. It's called Yerusha Bakever. That you inherit in the grave.
That is the case.
Right, that's the case. Right? Where he's dead. And the answer is, Halacha believes in Yerusha Bakever. It believes that the way Yerusha works is it goes through the son. And since it goes through the son, right, this is a case where there are sons and therefore the sisters are out. And now the dead father plus his brothers are competing for the property. And whatever portion he has goes to his children. And if he doesn't have sons, so then you apply to him in venein lo, right? And therefore, again, the simplest understanding I would say of the Machloket, the Stukim and Chazal here is that the Stukim believe that Yerusha does not pass Bekever. It goes directly to the relative. Right? And therefore, this is a question of who's closer, the daughter or the granddaughter. And we say, right, and then they say it's equal, and at worst it's equal, right? And we say no. It goes through every chain of relatives, right? And if it goes through every person in the chain, then it passed through a son. If it passed through a son, that means there are sons, right? Yes, Ezra.
Sisters aren't a thing, right, for Yerusha? There's no, that's not right.
Sisters are a thing.
For Yerusha.
I have a sister, they exist.
So do I, but for purposes of Yerusha, they're not a thing, right? So...
What do you mean they aren't a thing? Like your sisters don't inherit from you? No.
Yeah, so if someone were to have a daughter and a deceased son who has no kids, would you say that it would go
to the sister?
Well, it would go to the sister.
Well, yeah, because then because then the father would inherit, and then it would go, right? Meaning, if Yaakov dies,
yes,
right, and Reuven is already dead,
sorry,
fine. If this is how everyone does it, fine, right? They just use the avot. But if you want, I can do other places in Tanakh. You just have to assure me that you understand what's going on there. That's what I thought, right? Okay. If Yaakov Avinu had died, right, and Reuven was already dead,
yes,
right? So then, and Reuven had no children, so then, who's the next heir? Daughter. He doesn't have any daughters. What's the next heir? Father, which means it goes back to Yaakov. It goes from Yaakov to Reuven, back to Yaakov, and now Yaakov, he has a daughter, so it goes to Dinah.
So it's not, it doesn't work like, it goes to Reuven, and then Reuven has no next of kin other than...
But his next of kin is his father. If he doesn't have a son, his next of kin is... If he doesn't have a child, the next of kin is his father.
Okay, but it doesn't like...
So it doesn't go directly to his sister.
So...
I'm assuming this right now.
Venein lo is...
In Ben Lo, it goes to the bot. If there isn't a bot, it goes to the father.
But Ben Lo means no living son or no son period?
No son period.
So that means...
But if he has...
He doesn't have a son, so
But if he had a son who's dead, it still might end up with his sister, because it would go down to the dead son, but the dead son doesn't have anyone, so go to the father.
It should go to Esau before it goes to Dinah. Was that the right one?
No, it shouldn't, because it goes up to Yaakov, and then...
He has a dead son, therefore he has a Ben, so it shouldn't be about...
No, but then it goes down first. It always goes down first.
But...
If there's no down, it can go horizontal.
Only because the pasuk says that if he has no son, instead of going to the person's...
Because in halacha we say it goes to children, then parents. It goes on the vertical line first. Then yes, it always goes vertical first, up and down.
Well, only...
To go to Esav, it would have to go back up to Yitzchak. But... Right, to get to Dinah, it doesn't. It goes to Yaakov and then back down. You always try to go down. Right, you only go up if you can't go down. To get to Esav, you'd have to go up or horizontal. We always go down before we go up.
According to the natural law, like without the pasuk specifically gives daughters inheritance, you would say is that that it wouldn't follow that principle, because without the pasuk...
Possibly. If we didn't know that daughters inherited, then presumably maybe it would go to Esav. Yes,
right, but because Ben Lo doesn't apply because he has a dead son who counts as a son, therefore...
Meaning, but by the time you get to halacha, we rule that all the vertical ones go first, and therefore, yeah, it would end up by the sister. It would end up by Dinah rather than by Esav.
I feel like that doesn't make sense.
Because it always goes up, down. It always goes down. If it can't go down, it goes up and then down again.
That's like a simplification. That's like making a general rule that works with most of the cases.
No, all cases. That's why I'm saying it. It works in every single case.
But I'm saying according to the actual rules that the initial rules or whatever that were given, then in this specific case, then what that rule, you get two different results. So I'm saying
no, you don't get. There's only one possible result.
According to the rules outlined.
If you assume that no, according to the rules in the Torah, where it first goes down to children. If it doesn't go to children, it goes up to parents. But you always try to get it to go to children, so then it'll always go lower down the list.
Only in the event where there is no son at all do you try to give it to a daughter. That's the rules given by the Torah. Unless Ben Lo means living son.
No, meaning in this case, it goes to the daughter because it reverted back, right?
But the rule of Ben Lo, give it to the daughter.
No, but this is not going to the daughter directly. Meaning, it's not going to the daughter. It's not going directly. It's going back because it failed to find another place. Meaning, no. You misunderstand. In halacha, Reuven inherited. He's just dead. So now someone needs to inherit him.
Yeah.
So his father inherits him.
Okay.
Right.
And so if that's Yaakov, and Yaakov, the rule of Ben Lo doesn't apply, so it goes to Yaakov's brother as opposed to his daughter.
No, it doesn't go to his brother.
But he has a son who's dead. He has a son.
Correct, and it keeps going back down and then up, so it goes down.
The pasuk of the whole thing, Ben Lo, is completely unnecessary if you're going to follow those rules, even when it doesn't apply. He gives a qualifier. It goes to a daughter.
This is an exceptional case because this goes back to the father and needs to go somewhere. Yeah, in a chanami, but it always works.
The rule of Ben Lo doesn't apply in this case, it seems, so it shouldn't go to the daughter, according to that.
Meaning it's not a normal inheritance, but it does go there. Only because there's nowhere for it to go, so it has to go back.
It can go to a brother.
No, because in order to go to a brother, it would have to go up extra generations.
It's the...
Hakarav, remember, Hakarav Kodem. Karav is... And children are always considered closer relatives. And therefore, the daughter, right...
Well, in that case, if Yitzchak was still alive, would you say it goes to Yitzchak before it goes to Dinah? Because if we're saying the whole Havar 10 is that...
No, that's exactly the point. Havar 10 means you give it to the daughter before the father. Well, I think in general you give it to the daughter before the father.
Okay. I don't understand that, but okay.
Okay, I think so. I mean, it's confusing, but I think so. So he says, "V'nitzchum," so they beat them. V'oto hayom asau yom tov, and that day they made a holiday. V'yomru Yerushat Pleitali Bilavin V'limachashevet Misrael. Then the Gemara transitions to the story of Binyamin at the end of Shoftim. What's the story of Binyamin at the end of Shoftim?
They all got genocided, besides like 800 or something.
Right after the travesty in Giva, right, where the people in Binyamin gang raped the Pilegesh, and therefore the Jews wanted to exact justice. Binyamin defended them. They ended up in a civil war, and finally, after several failed attempts at battle, they beat Binyamin, and when they beat Binyamin, part of that is that they annihilate them, right, down to a few hundred people, right? But there's no one for them to marry, right? So they say, well, who wasn't with us when we promised we wouldn't let anyone marry them? So they said, Anshe Yavish Gilad, right? And they kill all the men and then give the one to them, right? And then yes.
I thought it was the like kidnapping.
No, that's the remainder. Right? There's two stages. One is they say who didn't promise, and they say, the people who didn't promise, well, you shouldn't, that was because you didn't show up when you were supposed to, so they killed the men and gave them to...
They deserved to die, so then it was like...
Correct. And then the remainder, they did the kidnapping thing, correct.
Just kill people just to solve this problem.
Exactly. So then the Gemara says, here's the problem. V'yomer Yerushat Pleitala Binyamin v'limachashevet mi-Yisrael. So Amar Rabbi Yitzchak Tefei Rabbi Hami Melamed Noal Shevet Binyamin Shlo Tiresh Bat Haben Im Ha'achem. What you learn from here is that they made a condition with the people of Binyamin that in that case daughters would not inherit, a temporary takana. Why? Because if they did, then the little Yerusha they would have would dissipate. And then Amar Rabbi Yochanan Mishum Rishon ben Yochai Kol she'eino meniach ben liyarsho HaKadosh Baruch Hu malei alav evra. Anyone who doesn't leave a male child to inherit, God is angry at you. Because in the context of the word that it uses for daughters to inherit, it says Ve'ha'avartem, it shall pass. But the Gemara reads it, Yom Evra. Evra also means a day of wrath. Yom Evra, Yom Ahu. And therefore, the day that you give your property to your daughter is a day in which God's wrath is evident. Okay, so if you just had this Gemara, what would you say? Does the Gemara have a fundamental opposition to daughters inheriting?
Yeah.
Maybe. Okay, that's a good one. So Gabi says maybe. Why maybe?
Well, it has a fundamental opposition to not having a son.
Okay, so first of all, the last Agata definitely says that it's not just that, like, giving it to your daughters, that's like, well, you don't have sons, give it to daughters, and that's neutral. Right? No. Like, sons should inherit. And if daughters inherit, that is evidence of God's wrath. Right? So Gavi says that already points in the direction that maybe it's not just that boys happen to inherit, that sons happen to inherit, but like fundamentally that's the right thing. And therefore, God is really angry. If God leaves a situation where we only have girls, that shows that God hates you and is angry and whatever, right? That might be an indication that this isn't a value-neutral thing. Right? Okay. How else might you read the Agadata? Yes?
I sorry, I'm just very...
What about the earlier part of the Gemara? What is the earlier part of the Gemara? What does the earlier part of the Gemara seem to?
It might be opposed to daughters inheriting just by the fact that it's
Right. So Yaakov says, well, it might be that we also have an opposition to girls inheriting. Because even though our case is not identical to that case, that's a very specific case, right? Granddaughter, what you see in that one, so either you just say, well, it sounds sort of Stuki-like, or more specifically, Stukim grant a more direct relationship to daughters than we do. right? Meaning, they think, because of how they think Yerusha passes, they think that daughters, right, can compete with the children of sons. And we don't. Which means that we seem to have a more fundamental understanding of it going to sons. Now, again, that could just be because of Yerusha B'Kever things. But what stands out in the end is that, yes, the Tzdukim believe in a higher level of equality amongst the sons and daughters, right? Where they don't exclude daughters from inheritance the second a son ever existed, and we do, right? So you could look at the Gemara and either say, well, therefore, any attempt to strengthen the hand of a daughter is Tzduki-like, or more fundamentally, you might think that part of the opposition is exactly this question, right? How much does the Torah really not believe in daughters inheriting? And we believe it more fundamentally and exclusively than the Tzdukim. And therefore, if you wanted to, you could definitely look at both sides of this Gemara. Both the argument here with the Tzdukim, as well as the Agadic end, as Gavi points out, of wrath, as saying, no, this is like really something we believe. That sons are more related, and that is something that has to be respected, and that's true cross generations, and any attempt to manipulate this is problematic. Right? That's one way of reading this Gemara. But Gavi said maybe. Why maybe, Gavi?
Because it's not entirely clear that it's specific to the daughters.
Right, so first of all, it might just be, meaning what?
Meaning it's about the lack of sons.
Right, meaning, good. So Gavi says, well, maybe not. Maybe it's just like, look, it's not about the inheritance per se. It's like, if you end up in a situation that your daughters inherit, that's because God prevented you from ever having sons. And that's really the problem here. God's wrath isn't because it went to the daughters. It's because going to the daughters is a siman to the fact that God withheld sons from you. Good, and what about the Tzduki one? If you wanted to negate the Tzduki proof, you could say it's much more technical, right? That it's about Yerusha B'Kever. It's not about sons versus daughters. It's about Yerusha B'Kever, right? Meaning it's simply about, do you think that Yerusha passes directly from the grandfather or through the son? It's not about who's greater. Meaning everyone agrees, right? It's a technical question. It doesn't tell you anything about whether we oppose it. Good. So therefore, this Gemara, while at some level it does seem to touch on it, it's not clear how directly it does. Okay, fine. Let's try to at least get through one more Gemara. I wasn't sure how long this would take, but okay. Because of how much you dislike this Gemara, it took long. That's fine.
I want to whine more about it.
You want to whine about it more? Go, Rami. Whine away.
How bad of a sin would it be, like, to actually, just ignore all inheritance laws?
We're going to get there. We haven't done that yet. We'll see. Okay, fine. But let's try one more Agadic passage. So the Gemara in Shabbat Kuftet Zayin. Oh God. Ima Shalom debitu de Rebbe Eliezer achte de Rabban Gamliel Abai. Ima Shalom was the wife of Rabbi Eliezer, the sister of Rabban Gamliel. Have hahu philosopha. There was a philosopher, philosopher. B'shilivuta in his neighborhood, Dave Shakel. Shma de lo mikabel shochad, and he had a reputation that he, right? Is it shuchda? Yeah. The ink went dry, so I don't have the last words on anything of this thing. Shuchda, but he had a reputation that he didn't accept bribes. So they wanted to mock him. They wanted to show that it wasn't true, that he was less honest than people thought about him. So what did they do? What did they do?
Gave him a golden lamp.
Gave him a gold lamp. And then what did they say?
So then, Ima Shalom sued her brother.
What does that mean?
So he came before her and said, like, hey, I want to have my father's money.
Right, so what happened? So first, what happens? What does he say?
Go take a portion.
So Amar Lu, Pogu, divide. Then what happens?
the Rabban Gamliel was like,
He says, but the Torah says,
that daughter's not inherit.
right? Exactly. But Makom bra the law teru. So then, what does he say? So then, what happens? Yeah.
It's like, you know.
Amar le'min yomad digalitun me'arachon itlano right to the Moshe v'id yahavut avon. What's the next word? Galut.
That's the Old Testament.
Galut.
Focus on the
Be bra uvata kechada yartun. He said that was in the Torah, but in the whatever New Testament, the Mashiach, sons and daughters inherit equally. Then what happened the next day?
Then he gave him a.
So then.
A super special.
Good. So then he bribed him. And now they go back and they challenge him again. And what does he paskin this time? You never add to the Torah. You never subtract from the Torah. Right? You can't add or subtract from the Torah of Moshe. And which says, right? And then they reveal him, right, for being someone who takes bribes, yada, 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 yada. Okay, fine. What about this, Gemara? What would you say?
I mean, it doesn't seem like they're all that, upset, like, with him, like, just, ruling against the Torah, initially.
Well, so what's interesting in this Gemara is that, does it raise the possibility that daughters should inherit like sons? Yes, and it identifies that as a non-Jewish view. Right? Right? That's what it does. So, you look at this Gemara and then you got to figure out, okay, well, what does that tell me? On the one hand, that might tell me, Jews believe that sons inherit and daughters don't.
Also,
and this belief that men and women should inherit equally, that's external, that's Christian, that's the philosopher, that's an external philosophy, it has to be avoided at all costs. Right? That's one way of reading this Gemara. Right? And what's the other way, Rami?
The other way is that,
as you said, that's not the issue of the Gemara.
Yeah.
The real issue of the Gemara is bribery, right? It's trying to show that this guy was dishonest. Now, it happened to be that it manifested itself this way. But it's not that the Christian view or the philosophical view is that sons and daughters inherit equally. Because the guy changed his mind. It was just... Right, the point of the story is not daughters inherit, daughters don't inherit. The point of the story is... Right, is don't change the way you paskin based on bribes, right? That's the story here, right? So in the end of the day, I think it's hard to firmly derive from the Agadot whether whether Chazal actively oppose daughters inheriting or not, right? It depends how you read these texts. Okay. How about this? We don't have so much time, so let's put it this way. Rav Kook, let's skip to Rav Kook, okay? Because I'd rather you read the Gemaras yourself, so if you haven't read the Gemara in Ketubah, do it. Rav Kook, when faced with the question of whether the girls we should find a way from their heritage, what was Rav Kook's position? What did Rav Kook claim? He made a philosophical claim, and what did he say?
I didn't get there.
Very good. So I'll read it with you. It's fine, right? That's why I'd rather read it with you, because if you don't work through Rav Kook by yourself, it's not the end of the world, right? So Rav Kook looks at these Agadotot, and he takes a firm position, which is the Torah has a philosophical view that sons inherit and girls don't. And when the Gemara quotes the story that this Christian philosopher, whatever, that sons and daughters inherit, that's telling you that the idea of equality is a non-Jewish idea. Rav Kook, by the way, consistently believes this. Rav Kook thinks that the move to have women vote is heretical because it is an encroachment of feminist values into Torah. What?
I don't even know.
And he's really angry about it. He gets really, really angry about it. It's really, really wild. And like nowadays, women vote in the most Haredi of communities. Like everyone, but Rav Kook, it's the stay, sit, Rami. No, you're then gonna miss it. Wait, 5 minutes. Come on, we're almost done. Okay, but Rav Kook takes the view. He looks at the sugya and he says, "Aha! This desire to have daughters inherit practically is an encroachment of some egalitarian ideal, which is not Jewish, as you see in the Gemara. That's what the Christian philosopher person is saying." And he says, "Kol chok umishpat sheba'olam lo yimale le'olam et kol ha'trishot shel kol ha'pratim." No law can make everybody happy. Chukei dat vadin kamo chukei hateva hinam kol olim. Laws of law are like laws of nature. Where does he get this from? The Rambam. The Rambam in Mar Nevuchim Chilek Gimel Tshuva Siman Lamed Daled, Perek Lamed Daled, says that law only is not meant to make everybody happy. It's meant to make most people happy, or most people live more meaningful lives. Some people will be counterproductive. That's just the way it works. Okay, so that's where he gets this from. And he says, "V'zod hiti latam uzam." That's their praise and their strength. The sun goes out, and if that means that sometimes you schwitz, so you get a sunburn or whatever, too bad. Just because the sun beating down isn't good for everybody, doesn't mean that the sun should stop existing. People who are traveling, who don't want to get wet, Hashem ignores their tefillah when they say stop the rain, if the world needs rain, right? Because that's not fair, right? You're walking, so therefore there should be no rain for the crops. Too bad. Yes, and that's why he's playing on that Gemara, where the Gemara says that Yochanan Mendoza realized that, oh, now I'm happy, the whole world is sad, and he davened for it to reverse. But he was because he was the exception. But that's a wrong thing to happen, and he's the exception. That's the point, right?
We don't say it takes on until later, just so people can walk back.
Well, that's because they're coming to a mitzvah, and it's a lot of people. It's Klal Yisrael. It's not just one person. Oy lo lekalot da'am shetishlach yadav v'mikdash Ram Nisan. Therefore, woe to those people who try to go against the Torah. Bechal Mishpat, right, to basically distort the Beit HaMikdash, the holy Beit HaMikdash. And even if the reason that they go against the Torah is the idea of justice, right? Because they say they're thinking justice and morality and equality. Ota midat harachamim halokeach me'aben yerushato. That mercy that takes inheritance from sons and gives it to a daughter, which he deserves by right of Torah law, just because he has mercy on the daughters. He's going against God, who holds all in his otzar. Right, that's what it means, right? Adir Tzarot, meaning God controls all and gives out what people need. And by you thinking you're going to be more merciful than the Torah, you are challenging God's ability to divide up assets in a way that He sees fit. That's what He's saying. Just because you have rachamim on poor people. Woe is to the world for such mercy. It is the mother of all evil, cruelty, and disgusting things. The soul of a nation, and ours especially, it depends on the Torah itself. Christianity went in its merciful direction. Right? And yet, right, it uses its mercy to challenge Jews, to kill Jews, right, etc. Right? These merciful Christians, the people who carried out crusades and things like that, right? They're the ones who say that our Torah is not merciful. Okay? So Rav Kook looks at this Gemara of the Christian philosopher, and what does he derive from this? It's not just the Torah says the daughters don't inherit, it says daughters should not inherit when there are sons. And to do that is a distortion of everything we believe in. And therefore you shouldn't try to find any loopholes that give it to daughters because you're taking it away by right, and you think you're more merciful than God, and you think that God doesn't know how to deal with his assets, right? So Rav Kook takes a very hard line here, right? I think that's a fair description. A very hard line on this, and therefore opposes any mechanism to give daughters inheritance. What we're going to see tomorrow, and you'll see that Chazon Ish does this as well. But one second. Rav Herzog is going to push back, and Rav Herzog is going to say, "Ma pitom." Right? What are you talking about? And in order to do that, he's going to do two things. He's going to make an agadic claim, right, meaning a philosophical claim, and a halachic claim. And what he's going to show is, first of all, philosophically, I will show you that the Gemara isn't opposed to daughters inheriting. It's not like what you think. That's point one he's going to do. And what's the second thing he's going to do? Show that even in the time of Chazal, they were willing to express this belief that daughters should in some way get property after death in halacha. And therefore he's going to prove, both through philosophical statements and halachic statements, that the tradition, A, does not believe that the Torah is viciously opposed to letting daughters have anything, that it doesn't believe this is a fundamental value or opposition to whatever. And two is not only that, but I'll prove to you halachically that Chazal practically already started the process of functionally allowing girls to get property posthumously, or, after their father's death, right? And the combination of the halachic data and the philosophical data is going to tell you that no. Another tradition would tell you the daughters just happen not to inherit. Because we're talking primarily land inheritance, and the land inheritance has to, have to have one avenue and can't be switching, whatever you want to say, right? I mean, he has his particular take on it based on the Radbaz. And towards that end, and I'll let you go because I know you have to go to the bathroom, okay? Towards that end, he writes, tomorrow I'll really explain this, but Rav Herzog, one of the things that is unique about Rav Herzog is he believed that in order for the Jewish state to exist, you needed to basically totally revitalize the legal system and set up takanot. So he has multiple volumes of books called Tichukal Yisrael B'Torah, which is how do we make legislations that will make Torah livable in the modern world. And one of the many gzerot he had was to systematically create mechanisms to allow daughters to inherit, right? So what we want to do tomorrow is understand why he thought that Rav Kook was wrong, right? That the evidence does not support this strong opposition, right? That it's not opposed to equality, which is quite a strong statement, I'll be honest. That, right, Rav Kook is like, the Torah opposes equality and justice on principle, right? Or at least the way you understand it more specifically. And we'll see that Rav Herzog is going to push back on it halachically, philosophically, and we'll see that tomorrow. Plus, his main philosophical argument is from this Mitzudat David, which is the Radbaz's Sefer HaMitzvot. And then we'll see that Chazon Ish goes like Rav Kook and lambasts Rav Herzog's entire approach, and we'll see that tomorrow, okay? And if Rav Kook's piece bothered you, that's fine. I gave it to you because I want you to understand what's really at stake here, right? Because that's exactly my point. A lot of people just jump to the halachic thing is, well, what mechanism do we use? But there's a philosophical question here at stake that affects which halachic mechanism you choose to use. This is an important question. That's why it's worth spending a day or two. I see at least one of you is disturbed by Rav Kook. That's good. But then you'll understand what Rav Herzog is doing when he says that's a wrong read of the halachic system.